The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered tombstone as Wyatt Chambers knelt in the damp grass, his calloused fingers tracing the engraved letters of his wife's name. Zachariah. Tears welled in his eyes as they did each morning for the past 3 years, the pain of losing her to childbirth still as fresh as the day she'd been laid to rest in this quiet corner of Silverbrook Cemetery. Wyatt removed his hat, revealing hair graying at the temples though he was only 34. The Arizona Territory of 1878 had not been kind to him since Zachariah's passing. Their ranch, once thriving with cattle and promise, now barely sustained itself. He'd lost his will alongside his wife, letting fences fall into disrepair and cattle numbers dwindle. "Morning, Zach," he whispered, placing a single wildflower on the grave as he did every day. "Sky's clear today. Reminds me of your eyes." His ritual never varied. Dawn would find him riding from his ranch to this hillside, spending an hour in silent communion with memories before returning to a day of half-hearted labor. The townsfolk of Silverbrook had grown accustomed to the sight of the tall cowboy, making his daily pilgrimage, his shoulders hunched beneath the weight of grief. "Mr. Chambers?" "Sir." The small voice startled Wyatt. He turned to find a boy standing several paces away, hat clutched nervously in small hands. The child couldn't have been more than 10, thin as a rail with tousled brown hair and clothes that had clearly been patched many times over. "What is it, boy?" Wyatt's voice came out rougher than intended, rusty from disuse. "My name's Tommy, sir. Tommy Miller." The boy took a tentative step forward. "I was wondering if you might need help. On your ranch, I mean. I can work hard." Wyatt stared at the child, momentarily speechless. No one approached him during these morning visits. It was an unspoken rule in Silverbrook. "I don't need any help," he finally replied, turning back to the grave. "Please, sir." The boy persisted, stepping closer. "My ma died last winter, and pa's been gone 3 years now. I'm staying with my aunt, but she's got 5 children of her own. I need to earn my keep." Something in the boy's determined gaze caused Wyatt to look more closely. There was a familiar stubborn pride there, a refusal to accept charity that reminded him of himself at that age. "You're too young for ranch work," Wyatt said, but with less conviction. "I'm stronger than I look," Tommy insisted. "I can feed animals, fetch water, mend fences. I'll work for meals and a place to sleep in your barn. Please, Mr. Chambers." Wyatt looked back at Zachariah's grave, almost as if seeking her counsel. The morning breeze rustled the wildflowers growing nearby, and for a moment, he could almost hear her voice. "Let him in, Wyatt. You've been alone too long." With a heavy sigh, Wyatt rose to his feet, towering over the hopeful boy. "Be at the ranch by noon. We'll see what you're made of. But I'm warning you now, I'm not much for conversation these days." The smile that lit up Tommy's face was the brightest thing Wyatt had seen in years. "Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. You won't regret it." As Wyatt mounted his horse to return to the ranch, he couldn't help wondering if he'd just made a terrible mistake. He'd deliberately kept people at a distance since Zachariah died, including her sister Zoe, who lived in town. The last thing he needed was a child underfoot, stirring up memories of the family he'd never have. Yet as he rode back through the rolling grasslands, he found himself checking the cabin's spare room in his mind, wondering if the boy would prefer beef or beans for supper. By mid-afternoon, Wyatt had put Tommy to work gathering eggs from the chicken coop and hauling water. The boy worked with surprising diligence, never complaining even when the water buckets clearly strained his thin arms. "You can put your things in the side room," Wyatt said gruffly as the sun began to set. "There's a cot there. Used to be for ranch hands when I had more than just myself." Tommy's meager belongings fit in a single flour sack, an extra shirt, a small wooden horse carving, and a tattered book. Wyatt recognized it as a primer, the kind used for teaching children their letters. "You can read?" he asked, surprising himself with the question. Tommy nodded eagerly. "Ma taught me before she passed. I'm still learning the harder words, but I practice when I can." After a simple dinner of beans and cornbread eaten in awkward silence, Wyatt retreated to the porch with his pipe. To his dismay, Tommy followed, sitting a respectful distance away on the steps. "Mr. Chambers?" the boy ventured after several minutes. "Who was she?" "The lady you visit each morning." Wyatt nearly snapped at the boy to mind his own business, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the sincere curiosity in those young eyes, or the fact that no one had asked him about Zachariah in so long. "My wife," he said finally, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "Zachariah Chambers." Everyone called her Zach. "That's a funny name for a lady," Tommy observed. Despite himself, Wyatt felt his lips quirk. She thought so too. Her father wanted a boy. When she arrived instead, he gave her the name anyway, said she'd grow into it. He took a long draw on his pipe. And she did. "Strongest woman I ever knew." "How did she die?" Tommy asked, then immediately looked down. "I'm sorry. That's not proper to ask." Wyatt stared into the darkening sky, surprised to find himself wanting to answer. "Childbed fever. Our son came early. Neither survived." Tommy nodded solemnly. "My ma died of the consumption. I used to visit her grave too, but then we had to move to my aunt's house." The simple understanding in the boy's voice created a moment of connection Wyatt hadn't expected. They sat in silence as the stars emerged, two souls acquainted with loss. "Time for bed," Wyatt finally said, tapping out his pipe. Dawn comes early on a ranch. That night, for the first time in 3 years, Wyatt dreamed of Zachariah not as she was in death pale and still on blood-soaked sheets, but as she had been in life, laughing as she raced him across the meadow on horseback, her chestnut hair streaming behind her like a banner. The next morning, Wyatt rose before dawn as usual. He was surprised to find Tommy already awake, attempting to kindle a fire in the cook stove. "You don't have to do that," Wyatt said. "I want to earn my keep," Tommy replied seriously. "I can make coffee. My pa taught me before he left." Wyatt watched as the boy carefully measured the grounds, just as he himself would have done. There was something both heartbreaking and heartwarming about a child, so young, trying so hard to be useful. "I'm going to visit Zach," Wyatt said after breakfast. "I'll be back in an hour. Feed the chickens while I'm gone." At the cemetery, Wyatt found himself talking more than usual. "Took on a boy for help, Zach. Skinny little thing named Tommy. Reminds me a bit of your brother when he was young. Same determined look." He paused, running his hand through his hair. "Don't know what I'm doing, taking in some strange child. But he needed somewhere to go, and the ranch needs the help." As the days passed, a routine developed. Wyatt would visit Zachariah's grave each morning while Tommy tended to the chickens and started breakfast. They would work together through the day, Wyatt finding himself explaining ranching tasks he'd performed automatically for years. Tommy soaked up the knowledge like parched earth in a rainstorm. One evening, after a day spent repairing the north pasture fence, Wyatt found Tommy attempting to read by the dim light of a single candle. The boy struggled over certain words, his forehead creased with concentration. "What are you reading?" Wyatt asked. Tommy held up the book. "Robinson Crusoe. Ma started reading it to me, but we never finished." Without thinking, Wyatt reached for the book. "My father read this to me when I was about your age. Let me see." Soon, Tommy was settled beside him as Wyatt read aloud, his deep voice giving life to the adventure. When the boy's eyes began to droop, Wyatt marked their place with a piece of straw. "We'll continue tomorrow," he promised. And they did. Each evening, after chores were complete, they would read together by lamplight. Wyatt found himself looking forward to these quiet hours, rediscovering stories from his own childhood through Tommy's eager questions and observations. 2 weeks after Tommy's arrival, they rode into Silverbrook for supplies. Wyatt was uncomfortably aware of the curious stares they attracted the reclusive widower and the orphan boy riding double on his horse. He'd avoided town as much as possible since Zachariah's death, conducting only necessary business. "Wyatt Chambers, as I live and breathe," came a female voice as they tied up the horse outside the general store. Wyatt turned to find Zoe Caldwell, Zachariah's younger sister, looking at him with undisguised surprise. At 28, she shared Zachariah's chestnut hair and blue eyes, though her features were softer, her frame more delicate than her sister's had been. "Zoe," he acknowledged with a nod, feeling the familiar twist of grief at seeing his wife's features echoed in her sister's face. "And who might this be?" Zoe asked, smiling warmly at Tommy. "This is Tommy Miller. He's helping me at the ranch," Wyatt explained, feeling oddly defensive. Tommy removed his hat politely. "Pleased to meet you, madam." Zoe's expression softened further. "The pleasure is mine, Tommy." She turned back to Wyatt. "This is a surprise. A pleasant one." Wyatt shifted uncomfortably under her gaze. He and Zoe had once been close, but he'd pushed her away after Zachariah died, unable to bear the reminder of what he'd lost. "We need supplies," he said abruptly. "Flour, coffee, ammunition." "Of course." Zoe stepped aside, but not before adding, "It's good to see you in town, Wyatt. Both of you." Inside the store, Tommy stayed close to Wyatt's side, eyes wide at the array of goods. When Wyatt caught him lingering over a display of peppermint sticks, he added one to their purchases without comment, rewarded by the boy's surprised smile. As they loaded their supplies, Zoe approached them again, this time carrying a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Some ginger snaps," she explained, handing them to Tommy. "I baked them this morning. My sister always said they were the best in the territory." Wyatt stiffened at the mention of Zachariah, but Tommy accepted the gift with enthusiasm. "Thank you kindly, Miss Caldwell. You're both welcome for Sunday dinner any time," Zoe added, her eyes meeting Wyatt's. "The invitation stands, as it always has." Wyatt merely nodded before mounting his horse and helping Tommy up behind him. As they rode away, he could feel Zoe's gaze following them. "She seems nice," Tommy ventured after they'd ridden a while. "She is," Wyatt admitted. "She's Zachariah's sister." "Is that why you don't talk to her?" "Because she reminds you of your wife." The question, direct and perceptive, struck Wyatt like a physical blow. "You asked too many questions," he muttered. Tommy fell silent, and Wyatt immediately regretted his harshness. The boy had merely spoken the truth that Wyatt himself had been unwilling to acknowledge. That night, after Tommy had gone to bed, Wyatt sat alone on the porch, turning over the day's encounter in his mind. Zoe had been Zachariah's only family, and after the wedding, she'd become his family too. In his grief, he'd shut her out completely, ignoring her letters and visits until eventually, they stopped. The realization of his cruelty sat heavily on his conscience. Zachariah would have been ashamed of him. Spring warmed into summer, and the ranch began to show signs of revival under the combined efforts of man and boy. Wyatt found himself rising each day with a sense of purpose that had been missing for years. The north pasture was cleared for new cattle, the barn roof finally repaired, the vegetable garden Zachariah had loved now tended by Tommy's careful hands. One hot July morning, as they rode out to check on a pregnant heifer, Tommy asked, "Will you still want me around when school starts, Mr. Chambers?" Wyatt glanced at the boy, surprised. "You want to go to school?" "Ma always said education was important," Tommy said earnestly. "I thought maybe I could go to the school in town and still help you mornings and afternoons." The thought of Tommy leaving, even for part of the day, created an unexpected hollow feeling in Wyatt's chest. He'd grown accustomed to the boy's presence, his endless questions, and surprisingly insightful observations. "If that's what you want," he said carefully, "we could arrange it." Tommy's face lit up. "Really? You wouldn't mind?" "Education is important," Wyatt echoed. "And Silverbrook has a good teacher, I hear." What Wyatt didn't say was that the teacher was none other than Zoe Caldwell, who had taken over the one-room schoolhouse 2 years earlier. The thought of facing her after so long filled him with trepidation. But the boy deserved an education, and if that meant confronting his past, so be it. That evening, they found the heifer had delivered a healthy calf. Tommy watched in wonder as the newborn struggled to its feet, wobbling on spindly legs. "What will you name it?" he asked. Wyatt, who hadn't named an animal since Zachariah died, considered the question seriously. "What do you think it should be called?" Tommy studied the black calf with its white, tipped ears. "Hope," he decided, "because it's a new beginning." Something shifted in Wyatt's chest at the simple wisdom in those words. "Hope it is," he agreed softly. As July faded into August, the preparations for the new school term began. Wyatt found himself in town more frequently, acquiring proper clothes for Tommy, new boots, and school supplies. Each visit brought him into Zoe's orbit, as she was often involved in town affairs. Their interactions were cautious at first, limited to polite nods and brief exchanges. But gradually, the ice between them began to thaw. "He's a bright boy," Zoe commented one afternoon as they watched Tommy examining a fishing rod in the general store window. "You're doing a good thing, giving him a home." "He's given as much as he's received," Wyatt admitted. "The ranch was falling apart before he came along." Zoe smiled, the expression so reminiscent of her sister that Wyatt's heart clenched. "Zachariah would be pleased." She always believed in second chances. The mention of his wife didn't bring the usual stab of pain. Instead, Wyatt found himself nodding in agreement. She did at that. Will you bring him for the school picnic next week? All the families attend to meet the teacher before term starts. Zoe's invitation was casual, but her eyes held a question that went deeper. Wyatt hesitated only briefly. We'll be there. The school picnic was held on the grounds of the white clapboard schoolhouse at the edge of town. Tables laden with food stretched under the oak trees, and children raced about playing tag while parents socialized. Wyatt felt conspicuous as he and Tommy arrived, aware of the curious glances and whispered comments. The Chambers Ranch had been a respected property before Zachariah's death, and many had watched with concern as Wyatt withdrew from society and let the place fall into disrepair. Mr. Chambers, Tommy, Zoe called, waving them over to where she stood with several other townsfolk. I'm so glad you could come. Tommy, Mrs. Wilson made her famous apple pie. You should try a piece while it's still warm. Tommy looked to Wyatt for permission before darting off toward the dessert table. He's looking to you for guidance, observed William Porter, the town's doctor who had attended Zachariah in her final hours. That's a good sign. Wyatt nodded, uncomfortable with the attention but determined to endure it for Tommy's sake. He's a good boy. Children are resilient, Dr. Porter continued. And so are adults, given time and the right circumstances. He clapped Wyatt on the shoulder before moving away, leaving him alone with Zoe. Thank you for coming, she said quietly. I know this isn't easy for you. Tommy deserves a normal life, Wyatt replied. I've kept him isolated too long already. And what about you? Zoe asked, her blue eyes so like her sister's searching his face. What do you deserve, Wyatt? Before he could formulate an answer, Tommy returned, mouth ringed with apple pie and excitement. Miss Caldwell, did you know Mr. Chambers is teaching me to rope calves? And I can ride Lady all by myself now. Zoe smiled at the boy's enthusiasm. That sounds wonderful, Tommy. Perhaps you could show me sometime. I'm not much of a rider myself. You could come visit, Tommy suggested eagerly. Mr. Chambers makes really good stew on Sundays, and we have fresh milk from Bessie. Wyatt found himself holding his breath as Zoe looked to him, clearly waiting for his reaction to this impromptu invitation. You're welcome anytime, he heard himself say, the words coming more easily than he'd expected. The smile that bloomed on Zoe's face was worth whatever discomfort the visit might bring. I'd like that very much. The school term began, and a new routine established itself. Wyatt would rise early, visit Zachariah's grave, then return to complete morning chores with Tommy before driving the boy to school in the buckboard. Some days he would return to the ranch immediately. Increasingly, though, he found reasons to remain in town, supplies to purchase, business at the bank, repairs to the wagon that required the blacksmith's attention. And if these errands often coincided with the school's midday recess, when Zoe might be seen supervising the children's play from the schoolhouse steps, that was merely coincidence. Or so Wyatt told himself. September brought Zoe to the ranch for Sunday dinner, as promised. She arrived wearing a simple blue dress that matched her eyes, her hair pinned up, but with tendrils escaping to frame her face. Tommy proudly showed her around the property, from the chicken coop to the vegetable garden to the new calf, now sturdy and playful. Wyatt watched their easy interaction with mixed emotions. There was guilt. Would Zachariah see this as a betrayal? But also a strange relief. For 3 years, he'd preserved his wife's memory by shutting out all that might bring him joy. Now, with Tommy's innocent intervention, life was creeping back in through the cracks in his defensive walls. Your stew lives up to its reputation, Zoe complimented as they ate at the kitchen table scrubbed clean for the occasion and adorned with wildflowers Tommy had collected. Mr. Chambers is a real good cook, Tommy agreed enthusiastically. He's teaching me too. I can make flapjacks now. A man of many talents, Zoe said with a smile directed at Wyatt, who felt a warmth in his cheeks that had nothing to do with the cooking fire. After dinner, Tommy insisted on showing Zoe his collection of interesting rocks and feathers, leaving Wyatt to clean up. Through the open window, he could hear their conversation, Tommy's excited explanations, and Zoe's interested questions. As he dried the last plate, Wyatt's gaze fell on Zachariah's sewing basket, still sitting in the corner where she'd left it. He'd preserved the house as a shrine to her memory, changing nothing, removing nothing. Even her clothes still hung in their shared bedroom, her hairbrush still on the dresser. For the first time, he wondered if this was the right way to honor her. Zachariah had been full of life and laughter. Would she have wanted him to live surrounded by reminders of death? When Zoe and Tommy returned, Wyatt made a decision. Would you like to see the photo album? Tommy hasn't seen the pictures of Zachariah yet. Surprise flickered across Zoe's face, quickly replaced by gentle understanding. I'd love that. The three of them sat together on the sofa as Wyatt carefully opened the leather-bound album. The first photograph showed Zachariah on their wedding day, her face serious beneath her veil as photography required, but her eyes dancing with suppressed mirth. She was beautiful, Tommy breathed. She hated sitting still for this, Wyatt recalled, a smile tugging at his lips. Said if God had meant people to hold poses for 10 minutes straight, he'd have made us statues. Zoe laughed softly. That sounds like her. Remember when the traveling photographer came through when we were children? Father insisted on formal portraits, and Zach made faces the moment the exposure was complete. As they turned the pages, Wyatt found himself sharing stories he'd kept locked away for years. Zachariah, breaking a wild Mustang that no one else could approach, her triumphant expression when she won first prize for her preserves at the county fair, the Christmas morning when she'd surprised him with the hand-tooled saddle he still used. She sounds amazing, Tommy said, his young face solemn with the weight of these shared memories. She was, Wyatt confirmed, closing the album gently. And she would have liked you very much, Tommy. Later, as he walked Zoe to her buggy, a comfortable silence settled between them. The setting sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and distant rain. Thank you, Zoe said finally, for sharing those memories. For a long time, I thought I'd lost both of you when Zach died. Wyatt helped her into the buggy, his hands lingering briefly on hers. I'm sorry for shutting you out. It wasn't fair to you. Grief makes its own rules, she replied simply. But I'm glad you're finding your way back. She gathered the reins, then added, same time next Sunday? Wyatt nodded, surprised by how much he was already looking forward to it. We'll be here. As autumn deepened, bringing gold and crimson to the cottonwoods along the creek, Wyatt's morning visits to the cemetery underwent a subtle change. He still went faithfully, but now he found himself talking to Zachariah about Tommy's progress in school, about the ranch's recovery, about Zoe's Sunday visits that had become a cherished tradition. I think you'd be proud of how he's coming along, Wyatt told the silent grave one crisp October morning. Reading at the top of his class, according to Zoe. Has a way with the animals, too. That ornery old rooster that used to chase you around the yard, he eats corn right from Tommy's hand now. A jay called from a nearby juniper, its harsh cry the only answer. Yet Wyatt felt a sense of peace that had been absent for years. I miss you, Zach. I always will. But I'm starting to think maybe the best way to honor you is to live the life we planned, even if you can't be in it. The wind picked up, sending a shower of golden leaves across the cemetery. One settled on Zachariah's headstone, and Wyatt left it there, a bright spot against the gray stone. That evening, as he helped Tommy with his arithmetic at the kitchen table, a knock at the door startled them both. Visitors were rare at the Chambers ranch, especially after dark. Opening the door revealed Sheriff James Morgan, his expression grave beneath his drooping mustache. Evening, Wyatt. Sorry to disturb you, but we've got a situation I thought you should know about. Wyatt stepped outside, closing the door partway to keep Tommy from overhearing. What is it, James? Zoe Caldwell's buggy was found abandoned on the North Road. No sign of her. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. There's been reports of a group of outlaws in the area. 3 men, possibly the same bunch that robbed the stage last week. Cold fear gripped Wyatt's heart. When was she last seen? Left the schoolhouse around 4, according to Mrs. Porter. She mentioned visiting a student's family in the North Valley. Wyatt was already moving toward the barn. I'll saddle up. Where are you organizing the search party? Town hall in 20 minutes. Wyatt, the sheriff hesitated. We don't know for certain there's foul play involved. Could be a broken wheel, or her horse got spooked. But they both knew better. The North Road was well-traveled, and Zoe was an experienced driver. If she'd had a simple mishap, someone would have found her by now. Returning inside, Wyatt found Tommy waiting anxiously. Is something wrong, Mr. Chambers? Wyatt considered shielding the boy from the truth, but decided against it. Tommy had already faced too much loss in his young life to be protected by lies. "Miss Caldwell is missing," he explained, keeping his voice steady despite the fear churning inside him. "I'm going to join the search party. Mrs. Jenkins from the next ranch will come stay with you." Tommy's face paled. "Is she? Do you think she's hurt?" "I don't know," Wyatt answered honestly. "But we're going to find her." The boy set his jaw determinedly. "I want to come too. I can help search." "No," Wyatt said firmly, already gathering his gun belt and extra ammunition. "It's too dangerous. These hills get treacherous at night, and there may be trouble." Seeing the mutinous look on Tommy's face, Wyatt knelt to his level. "I need you to stay here, son. Keep the lamps lit so we can find our way back. Can you do that for me? For Miss Caldwell?" The use of son wasn't lost on either of them. It was the first time Wyatt had called him anything but boy or Tommy. Reluctantly, Tommy nodded. "Yes, sir. I'll keep watch." Within the hour, Wyatt had joined 20 other men gathered in Silverbrook's town square. The sheriff distributed maps of the area, dividing them into search parties. "Chambers, you know the North Country better than most," Sheriff Morgan said. "Take Davis and the Wilcox brothers and check the old mining trails. Those ravines would make a good hiding place." Armed with rifles and lanterns, the men rode out into the darkness. A half-moon provided some light, but the rugged terrain cast deep shadows that could hide any number of dangers. As they reached the foothills, Wyatt raised his hand for silence. "We'll split up here. Cover more ground. Fire 2 shots if you find anything." Hours passed as Wyatt combed the rocky trails, calling Zoe's name until his voice grew hoarse. The temperature dropped, and his breath formed clouds in the cold night air. The thought of Zoe out in this cold, possibly injured, possibly at the mercy of desperate men, drove him forward despite exhaustion. Near midnight, 2 gunshots echoed through the hills to the east. Wyatt spurred his horse toward the sound, heart pounding with equal measures of hope and dread. He found Davis standing beside a small campfire, its embers still warm but abandoned. "Looks like they cleared out in a hurry," the younger man reported. "Found this." In his outstretched palm lay a small silver brooch in the shape of a bird, a gift Wyatt had seen Zoe wearing many times, a keepsake from her mother. "They can't be far," Wyatt said, examining the ground around the camp. 3 horses, heavily laden, and a 4th with a lighter rider. His voice hardened. "They have her." Following the tracks in the darkness was painstaking work, but Wyatt refused to wait for dawn. Each passing hour increased the danger to Zoe. The trail led deeper into the hills, toward the abandoned Maxwell silver mine. "We should go back for reinforcements," Davis suggested as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. Wyatt shook his head grimly. "No time. They'll either leave the territory with her, or—" He couldn't finish the thought. The abandoned mine came into view as the sun crested the hills, a dark opening in the rocky slope, the remnants of support structures standing like skeletal sentinels. 3 horses were tethered nearby, confirming Wyatt's suspicions. "You circle around back," he instructed Davis. "See if there's another entrance. I'll approach from the front. Wait for my signal." Creeping closer, Wyatt could hear voices echoing from within the mine, men arguing, their words indistinct but their tone angry. Then, cutting through their gruff voices, came a woman's voice, Zoe's voice, steady despite what must be terrible fear. "You won't get away with this. Half the county is looking for me by now." A harsh laugh answered her. "Let them look. By the time they find this place, we'll be long gone. And you with us, schoolmarm. Might be nice having a pretty lady along on the trail to Mexico." Rage surged through Wyatt, hot and clarifying. Drawing his revolver, he positioned himself beside the mine entrance, then called out, "You men in the mine, you're surrounded. Release Miss Caldwell and come out with your hands up." Silence fell, followed by hurried whispers. Then a gruff voice responded, "We've got the lady in here. You come in shooting, she dies first." "Wyatt," Zoe's voice, tremulous but alive. "Wyatt, there are 3 of them." A gunshot rang out, followed by Zoe's scream and a man's curse. "Shut her up. Next time I won't miss." Wyatt's blood ran cold. He couldn't rush in blindly, but every moment increased the danger. Then, from the back of the mine, came 2 gunshots, Davis's signal. Taking advantage of the distraction, Wyatt darted into the mine entrance, staying low. In the dim light filtering through the opening, he could make out 3 figures, 2 men with guns drawn, looking toward the rear of the mine where Davis's shots had come from, and a third holding Zoe, a knife at her throat. "Let her go," Wyatt commanded, his revolver aimed steadily at the man holding Zoe. "It's over." The standoff lasted only seconds, though it felt like an eternity. Then the outlaw holding Zoe made his fatal mistake, shifting the knife to fire his gun at Wyatt. The moment the blade moved from Zoe's throat, Wyatt fired, his shot striking true. The outlaw fell, and Zoe scrambled away. The remaining outlaws, realizing they were outflanked, surrendered as Davis appeared from the mine's rear tunnel, his rifle trained on them. Wyatt rushed to Zoe, gathering her into his arms. She was trembling but unharmed except for a bruise blooming on her cheek and rope burns on her wrists. "You found me," she whispered against his chest. "I knew you would." Holding her tightly, Wyatt made a silent vow never to let her go again. The journey back to Silverbrook was slow, with Zoe riding double with Wyatt while Davis led the captured outlaws. As they crested the final hill, Wyatt was surprised to see a small figure waiting by the road, Tommy, astride Wyatt's second horse. "I know you said to stay home," the boy said defensively as they approached. "But I couldn't just sit there not knowing." Zoe, exhausted but smiling, reached out to squeeze Tommy's hand. "I'm glad to see you, Tommy. It seems the Chambers men are my rescuers today." The boy's chest swelled at being included in this category, and Wyatt found he didn't want to correct the assumption. The entire town turned out to welcome the returning party. Dr. Porter insisted on examining Zoe, while Sheriff Morgan took charge of the outlaws. Wyatt and Tommy waited anxiously outside the doctor's office until Porter emerged with a reassuring smile. "She's fine, exhausted and a bit bruised, but nothing serious. She's asking for both of you." Inside, Zoe sat propped up on an examining table, a blanket around her shoulders and a cup of tea in her hands. Her face brightened as they entered. "My heroes," she said softly. "Thank you both." Tommy rushed to her side immediately, full of questions and concern. Wyatt held back, suddenly unsure of himself now that the immediate danger had passed. When Tommy finally ran out of questions, Zoe turned her attention to Wyatt. "The doctor says I shouldn't be alone tonight. Concussion precautions. I was hoping. That is, would it be an imposition if I stayed at the ranch?" "No imposition," Wyatt assured her quickly. "We have plenty of room." That night, after settling Zoe in Zachariah's old sewing room and making sure Tommy was asleep, Wyatt sat alone on the porch, processing the day's events. The thought of how close he'd come to losing Zoe left him shaken. In the moment he'd seen that knife at her throat, he'd realized a truth he'd been avoiding for months. His feelings for her had grown far beyond friendship. The screen door creaked, and Zoe stepped out, wrapped in a borrowed quilt. "I couldn't sleep," she explained. "Too many thoughts." "You should be resting," Wyatt admonished gently, but he moved over on the porch swing to make room for her. They sat in silence for a time, listening to the night sounds: crickets chirping, an owl calling in the distance, the soft nickering of horses in the barn. "I kept thinking about Zachariah," Zoe finally said. "When those men grabbed me, I was so afraid. But then I remembered how brave she always was, and it helped me stay calm." Wyatt nodded, throat tight with emotion. "She would have been proud of you. Do you think?" Zoe hesitated, then continued carefully. "Do you think she would approve? Of us becoming friends again, I mean." "Yes," Wyatt said without hesitation. "She always said you were the best person she knew, besides me." He smiled slightly at the memory. "She was biased, of course." Zoe laughed softly, then winced as the movement aggravated her bruised cheek. Wyatt reached out instinctively, his fingers gently brushing her injury. "I should have protected you," he murmured. "You found me," she corrected. "You saved me." And Wyatt. Her hand covered his where it rested against her face. "When I was in that mine, thinking I might die, my biggest regret was all the things I never said to you." Wyatt's heart thundered in his chest. "What things?" "That I've always cared for you. That seeing you come back to life these past months has been the greatest joy." Her blue eyes, so like Zachariah's yet uniquely her own, held his gaze steadily. "That I think there could be a future for us, if you wanted it to." The moment stretched between them, fraught with possibility. Then Wyatt leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a kiss that was both an ending and a beginning of farewell to the isolated existence he'd chosen after Zachariah's death, and an embrace of the life that still waited to be lived. When they parted, Zoe's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," Wyatt confirmed, drawing her closer. "But we'll need to move slowly. For Tommy's sake. And for mine. We have all the time in the world," Zoe assured him, resting her head against his shoulder. As autumn gave way to winter, the Chambers ranch underwent a transformation. Curtains that had been drawn for years were opened to let in the light. Rooms that had gathered dust were cleaned and put to use. The Christmas tree that Tommy insisted upon, the first in the house since Zachariah's death, filled the parlor with the scent of pine and the sparkle of homemade ornaments. Wyatt continued his morning visits to Zachariah's grave, but now he often brought Tommy along, the two of them sharing stories about the remarkable woman who had shaped both their lives in different ways. "Do you think Miss Caldwell will marry you someday?" Tommy asked one snowy December morning as they rode home from the cemetery. Wyatt, startled by the direct question, considered his answer carefully. "Would that bother you if she did?" Tommy shook his head vigorously. "No, sir. I like Miss Caldwell, and she makes you smile more." "She does at that," Wyatt acknowledged, marveling at the boy's perception. "But these things take time, Tommy." "Not too much time, I hope," the boy said pragmatically. "I'd like to have a proper family before I grow up completely." Wyatt laughed, the sound echoing across the snow-covered fields. "I'll keep that in mind." Christmas Eve found the three of them, Wyatt, Tommy, and Zoe, gathered around the fireplace after a festive dinner. Outside, snow fell gently, blanketing the ranch in pristine white. "Time for presents," Tommy announced, unable to contain his excitement any longer. They had agreed to exchange simple gifts, nothing extravagant. Tommy received a new fishing rod from Wyatt and a hand-knitted scarf from Zoe. Zoe unwrapped a leather-bound journal from Tommy for writing down school stories, and a delicate silver chain from Wyatt, designed to hold her mother's brooch that had been recovered from the outlaws. Wyatt opened Tommy's gift first, a hand-carved wooden picture frame containing a sketch the boy had made of the ranch house. "Drew it myself," Tommy explained proudly. "Miss Caldwell helped me get the perspective right." "It's perfect," Wyatt said sincerely, his throat tight with emotion. "Thank you, son." Zoe's gift to Wyatt was a book of poetry, dog-eared and clearly well-loved. "It was Zachariah's," she explained softly. "She lent it to me before she died. I thought you might want it back." Wyatt ran his fingers over the familiar volume, remembering how Zachariah would read aloud from it on quiet evenings. "Thank you," he said simply, the words inadequate for the gesture's significance. As the evening grew late, Tommy fell asleep on the rug before the fire. Wyatt carried him to bed, tucking him in as had become their nightly routine. "Merry Christmas, son," he whispered, brushing the hair from the boy's forehead. Returning to the parlor, he found Zoe standing by the window, watching the falling snow. The firelight cast a golden glow on her features, and Wyatt was struck anew by her quiet beauty. "It's been a remarkable year," she said as he joined her. "So much has changed. For the better, I hope," he replied, taking her hand in his. "Definitely for the better." Her smile was radiant in the dim light. "Though I've been thinking." "Always a dangerous pastime," Wyatt teased gently. "Tommy mentioned wanting to make things official. To be your son legally, I mean. He's worried about what would happen to him if something happened to you." Wyatt's heart clenched at the thought. "I've been thinking about that too. About adoption, making him a true Chambers." "He already is, in all the ways that matter," Zoe observed. "But the legal protection would give him security." "And what about you?" Wyatt asked, gathering his courage. "What would give you security?" Zoe's eyes widened slightly. "What are you asking, Wyatt?" Instead of answering immediately, he reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box he'd been carrying for weeks, waiting for the right moment. Opening it revealed a simple gold band set with a single pearl. "It's not fancy," he apologized. "But I thought that is, if you're willing." "Yes," Zoe interrupted, eyes shining with joyful tears. "Yes, Wyatt Chambers. I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Wyatt felt a sense of rightness settle over him. "I'll always love her," he said softly. "You know that." "I know," Zoe assured him, her hands framing his face. I loved her too, and I think she would be happy for us, for the family we're building with Tommy. Wyatt drew her close, his heart full of gratitude for this second chance at happiness. Merry Christmas, Zoe. Merry Christmas, my love. Spring came to the Arizona territory in a riot of wildflowers and new beginnings. The Chambers Ranch flourished under the care of its expanded family. Calves frolicked in green pastures, chickens scratched in the yard, and the vegetable garden promised a bountiful harvest. On a perfect May morning, Wyatt sat beside Zachariah's grave, a bouquet of her favorite wildflowers in his hand. But today, he wasn't alone in his vigil. Tommy stood beside him, solemnly placing a small stone on the grave marker, a tradition the boy had started, bringing a pretty rock or shell each visit to build what he called a memory path. And beside them both stood Zoe, her wedding band catching the morning light as she placed her own, offering a single perfect rose. We're getting married today, Zach, Wyatt said quietly. I wanted you to know first. The ceremony itself was simple but joyous, held in the meadow where Wyatt and Zachariah had once picnicked on summer afternoons. The entire town turned out to witness Judge Patterson unite the schoolteacher and the rancher, with Tommy standing proudly as best man. Do you, Wyatt James Chambers, take Zoe Elizabeth Caldwell to be your lawfully wedded wife? The judge intoned. I do, Wyatt answered, his voice steady with certainty. And do you, Zoe Elizabeth Caldwell, take Wyatt James Chambers to be your lawfully wedded husband? I do, Zoe replied, squeezing Wyatt's hand. Then by the authority vested in me by the territory of Arizona, I now pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. As their lips met to seal their vows, a breeze swept through the meadow, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of new beginnings. The celebration continued into the evening, with tables set up in the ranch yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, the community coming together to celebrate not just a wedding but a resurrection of sorts, the return of the Chambers Ranch and its owner to the heart of Silverbrook. As the night deepened and guests began to depart, Wyatt found himself on the porch with Dr. Porter, watching as Tommy demonstrated his lassoing skills to a group of admiring children, while Zoe looked on proudly. You've come a long way, the doctor observed. There was a time I worried you might follow Zachariah to an early grave. Wyatt nodded, acknowledging the truth in those words. I might have, if not for that boy. He nodded toward Tommy. He saved me before I even knew I needed saving. Children have a way of doing that, Porter agreed. And speaking of children, he glanced meaningfully toward Zoe. Have you and your bride discussed expanding your family further? We have, Wyatt confirmed, unable to suppress a smile. Tommy's eager for a brother or sister. Says every proper family needs at least 4 children. Porter laughed heartily. Well, you'd better get started then. Don't want to disappoint the boy. Later that night, after the last guest had departed and Tommy had finally been persuaded to go to bed despite his excitement, Wyatt and Zoe stood together on the porch, looking out over their ranch, their home. Happy, Mrs. Chambers? Wyatt asked, his arm around her waist. Completely, Zoe assured him, leaning into his embrace. Though I keep thinking about Zachariah, hoping she approves. She does, Wyatt said with certainty. I felt her with us today. In the sunlight, in the breeze. She's at peace. And now, finally, so am I. As if in confirmation, a shooting star streaked across the night sky, leaving a trail of silver in its wake. Make a wish, Zoe whispered. Wyatt smiled, pulling his new wife closer. No need. I already have everything I could wish for. And in that moment, it was true. From the depths of grief, he had found his way back to joy. From isolation, he had found family. The cowboy who had sat by his wife's grave each morning in solitary mourning now stood beneath the stars, his heart open once more to life and love. Tommy Miller, the orphan boy who had asked for work, had given Wyatt far more than he had received. He had given him a reason to live again, to rebuild, to hope. And Zoe, with her quiet strength and patient love, had shown him that honoring Zachariah's memory didn't mean forsaking his own future. Together, they would continue to visit the peaceful hillside where Zachariah rested. They would tell stories of her courage and laughter, keeping her spirit alive in their hearts and in their home. But they would also create new stories, new memories, new traditions for the family they were building. As Wyatt led his bride inside to begin their new life together, he silently thanked the brave, determined boy who had dared to approach a grieving man at his darkest hour. Some might call it coincidence or chance that Tommy had found his way to the cemetery that spring morning. Wyatt preferred to think of it as Zachariah's final gift to him, the push he needed to rejoin the world of the living. Love, he had learned, was not a finite resource to be depleted and mourned, but an endless wellspring that could flow in new directions without diminishing what came before. In loving Zoe and Tommy, he hadn't betrayed Zachariah's memory, he had honored it in the most meaningful way possible. By living, by loving, by building the family she had always wanted for him. And as he closed the door on the starlit night, Wyatt Chambers knew with absolute certainty that his heart, once shattered by grief, had not merely been mended, it had been made larger, stronger, and more capable of love than he had ever thought possible.